The letter was found by accident on a Tuesday afternoon in September when the Reverend's daughter was cleaning out her father's study 3 weeks after the funeral. And when she pulled the old King James Bible from the shelf, the one he'd carried through 40 years of ministry, its leather cover worn soft as skin, a yellowed envelope slipped from behind the backboard where someone had hidden it decades ago. Sealed but never sent, addressed in handwriting that made Rebecca's breath catch because she recognized it as her father's younger hand. And the name on the envelope was her mother's maiden name. But the date was impossible. June 1983, 2 years before her parents had supposedly met. She stood in the study with the letter in her trembling hands while afternoon light slanted through the window painting everything gold. And she knew, the way you know things, in dreams or in the moment before catastrophe, that opening this envelope would change everything she believed about her family, her childhood, her father's faith, and the God he'd spent his life serving. But her hands were already moving, already breaking the seal, already pulling out the pages covered in her father's careful script, and the first line read, "I'm writing this because I killed someone tonight, and I need to confess to someone, even if it's only to you, even if you never read it, even if I hide it away where no one will ever find it." Rebecca Morgan was 34 years old, unmarried, living in the same small New Hampshire town where she'd grown up, teaching English at the high school where she'd once been a student. Her father, Reverend Thomas Morgan, had been the pastor of Grace Community Church for as long as she could remember. A quiet man, deeply devout, known for his thoughtful sermons and his habit of sitting with people in their darkest moments, saying nothing, just being present for their pain. He died of a heart attack while preparing his Sunday sermon, found slumped over his desk by the church secretary on a Monday morning, pen still in hand, the sermon half finished. A good death, people said at the funeral. Doing what he loved, gone to be with the Lord. Rebecca had accepted it, mourned him, begun the slow work of sorting through his possessions. The parsonage, the small house beside the church, where he'd lived alone since her mother died 10 years ago, was full of books and papers. A lifetime of theology and pastoral care condensed into boxes and shelves. She'd saved the study for last, afraid of what memories it would hold. This was where he'd written his sermons, where he'd counseled troubled parishioners, where he'd sat late into the night, reading and praying and wrestling with faith. It still smelled like him, Old Spice and coffee and old books. The Bible had been on the top shelf, dusty and forgotten. Rebecca had remembered seeing it years ago, had asked her father once why he didn't use it anymore, and he'd said he preferred newer translations, that the King James language was beautiful, but sometimes obscured meaning. But she'd known there was more to it than that, had sensed something in the way he wouldn't look at the Bible, the way he'd quickly changed the subject. Now she knew why. She sat in his desk chair and read the letter by the afternoon light, and with each line, her understanding of her father, of her family, of her own life, crumbled like old paper. "I'm writing this because I killed someone tonight, and I need to confess to someone, even if it's only to you, even if you never read it, even if I hide it away where no one will ever find it." Her name was Emily Cartwright. She was 19 years old. She was my student at the Bible college where I teach, and she was beautiful and troubled and so desperate for salvation that I thought I could save her. But I couldn't. And tonight, because of my arrogance, my pride, my belief that I knew better than her doctors and her family, she's dead. It started 3 months ago when she came to my office hours. She told me she was hearing voices, seeing things, that demons were tormenting her. Her parents wanted her to see a psychiatrist, but she refused. She said psychiatry was a rejection of God's power, that prayer and faith were the only weapons against spiritual warfare. I should have sent her to the school counselor. I should have called her parents. I should have recognized mental illness and gotten her professional help. But I didn't, because I believed her, because I thought demons were real, and faith could cast them out. Because I was young and arrogant and so sure of my theology that I couldn't see the person suffering in front of me. I started meeting with her privately, praying over her, attempting exorcism, though I didn't call it that. I called it deliverance ministry. And for a while, she seemed better. The voices quieted. She smiled more. She thanked me for saving her soul. But tonight she called me at 2 a.m. frantic, said the demons were back, worse than before, that they were telling her to hurt herself, that she couldn't fight them anymore. I told her to come to my office, that we'd pray together, that God would deliver her. She arrived 20 minutes later, wild-eyed and shaking. We prayed for 2 hours. I commanded the demons to leave. I anointed her with oil. I read scripture over her, and she got worse and worse, more agitated, more terrified, until finally she ran out of my office and I chased after her. And, Sarah, I can't write what happened next. I can't put those images on paper, but she's dead. She threw herself from the 4th floor window of the theology building. I watched her fall. I heard the sound of her body hitting the pavement, and I know with every fiber of my being that I killed her as surely as if I'd pushed her myself. The police came, the ambulance, the dean. I told them what happened, that she'd been troubled, that I'd been trying to help her, that I didn't realize how serious it was. They believed me. They said it wasn't my fault, that I'd done what I could, that sometimes people are beyond saving. But it is my fault. I chose faith over medicine. I chose my theology over her well-being. I chose to believe I could save her instead of accepting that she needed help I couldn't provide. I'm writing this to you because I can't confess it to anyone else. If I tell the school, I'll be fired. If I tell the police the whole truth, I might face charges. If I tell my parents or colleagues, they'll say I was doing God's work, that it wasn't my fault, and I can't bear to hear that lie. So I'm telling you, even though we haven't met yet, even though you might never read this, I'm confessing to the woman I hope to marry someday, because if I'm going to spend my life with someone, they should know what I really am. A man who killed someone through hubris and misplaced faith. I'm leaving the Bible college tomorrow. I'm going to a small church in a small town where no one knows what happened. I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to atone. I'm going to be careful, measured, humble. I'm going to remember that faith without wisdom is dangerous. I'm going to make sure no one else dies because of my arrogance. And if we do meet, if we do fall in love, if I ever give you this letter, I hope you can forgive me. I hope you can see past what I did to who I'm trying to become. But I don't think I'll ever give you this letter. I think I'll hide it somewhere safe. Somewhere I'll see it every day as a reminder of my sin. Behind the Bible, maybe. The Bible I can't bring myself to use anymore because every verse reminds me of that night, of those prayers that didn't work, of the theology that failed a dying girl. I'm sorry, Sarah. I'm sorry for what I did. I'm sorry for what I am. I'm sorry you'll marry a murderer and never know it. The letter ended there, unsigned, as if her father had run out of words or courage, or both. Rebecca read it 3 times, each reading making it feel more and less real. Her father, Reverend Thomas Morgan, the gentlest man she'd ever known, the one who taught her that God was love, that faith was meant to comfort, not condemn, had killed someone, had driven a mentally ill girl to suicide through religious intervention instead of medical care. Except the timeline was wrong. This letter was dated June 1983. Her parents had married in 1985. Her mother's name was Sarah, yes, but Sarah Bennett before marriage, and according to family lore, her parents had met at a church picnic in 1984, had courted for a year, had married in a simple ceremony. But if this letter was written to her mother 2 years before they supposedly met, addressed to her maiden name. Rebecca set down the letter and picked up her phone. Her mother's sister, Aunt Linda, was still alive, still living in the town where Sarah had grown up. "Linda, it's Rebecca. I have a strange question. When did Mom and Dad actually meet?" A long pause. "Why are you asking?" "Because I found something. A letter from Dad to Mom, dated 1983. But I thought they met in '84. Another pause, longer this time. When Linda spoke again, her voice was careful. "What did the letter say?" "Just, it doesn't matter what it said. I just need to know the truth about when they met. Rebecca, your father made your mother promise never to tell anyone the real story. If you found something he wrote, maybe you should respect his privacy. He's dead, Aunt Linda, and I need to understand." Linda sighed. "They met at the Bible college. Your father was a teaching assistant, your mother was a student. They fell in love, but it was against school policy for faculty to date students. Your father was asked to leave the college because of it. They both left, him because he was fired, her because she couldn't bear to stay without him. They moved to New Hampshire and started over. The story about meeting at a church picnic was fiction, agreed upon to avoid judgment. Dating a student was scandalous enough without adding the complication of him being her instructor." Rebecca felt cold. Did she know about Emily Cartwright? Silence. Then, very quietly, "How do you know that name?" "So it's true. There really was a girl who died." "Rebecca, please, don't dig into this. Your father spent his whole life atoning for what happened. Let him rest in peace." "Did Mom know?" "Yes. He told her everything before they married. He gave her the choice to walk away. She chose to stay. She believed he was a good man who'd made a terrible mistake. She believed in his redemption." "And he never told anyone else?" "No, just your mother. As far as I know, the school ruled it suicide. The family didn't press charges, and your father left quietly. He buried it and built a new life on top of it." Rebecca hung up and sat in the study as the sun set, as the room darkened, as the shadows grew long. She thought about her father, about the man she'd known, quiet, careful, always measuring his words, always hesitant to give advice, always encouraging people to seek professional help alongside prayer. She'd thought it was wisdom. Now she understood it was fear. Fear of being wrong again, fear of hurting someone else, fear that his faith might fail another suffering person. Everything she knew about him was true, but it was built on a foundation of hidden tragedy. He'd been a good pastor, but only because he'd learned through devastating failure what bad pastoring looked like. He'd been humble, but only because he'd learned through arrogance what pride could cost. He'd been measured, but only because he'd learned through recklessness what happens when faith replaces reason. Rebecca looked at the Bible on the shelf, the one her father had hidden the letter behind. She pulled it down again, opened it. Inside the front cover, in faded ink, was an inscription, "To Thomas, on your ordination. May you always seek wisdom along with faith." Proverbs 3:13. Mom and Dad. Blessed is the one who finds wisdom, the one who gains understanding. Her father had carried that Bible through his early ministry, had read from it, preached from it, counseled from it, until the night Emily Cartwright died. Then he'd hidden the letter behind its backboard and put it on a shelf, a relic of the man he'd been before tragedy taught him humility. Rebecca spent the next week researching. She found Emily Cartwright's obituary from June 1983. Beloved daughter, taken too soon, struggled with mental illness, remembered for her bright spirit. She found brief news articles about a student's tragic suicide at a Bible college. She found nothing about Thomas Morgan's involvement, no accusations, no investigations, just a young woman's death, ruled as suicide, mourned and forgotten, except by her father, who'd carried that death with him for 40 years. Rebecca went to the church where her father had preached for 4 decades. The current secretary, Mrs. Patterson, had been there almost as long as he had. "Mrs. Patterson, did my father ever talk about his time before coming here? About his teaching at Bible college?" The old woman looked up from her desk, her eyes knowing. "No, dear. He never talked about before. Just about after. About serving this community, these people. Do you know why he left the college? I know what everyone knows, that he wanted a smaller, quieter ministry, that he felt called to pastoral work instead of teaching. Did he ever seem haunted? Like he was carrying something heavy?" Mrs. Patterson set down her pen. "Rebecca, your father was the best pastor this church ever had. He saved people, really saved them, not in the flashy evangelical way, but in the quiet way that matters. He sat with people in their darkest hours. He never promised easy answers. He always made sure people got the help they needed, whether that was prayer or therapy or medicine or all three. He understood that God works through human hands, including doctors' hands. Why? Why was he like that when so many pastors aren't? Because something taught him, something broke him, and rebuilt him into someone wiser. I don't know what it was, and I never asked. But whatever it was, it made him the kind of minister people needed." Rebecca left the church and drove to the cemetery, where both her parents were buried. She sat between their graves in the autumn afternoon, the leaves turning gold and red around her, and she talked to them the way she hadn't since she was a child. "I found the letter, Dad. I know what happened. I know about Emily Cartwright. I know about the guilt you carried." She wiped tears from her face. "And I understand now. I understand why you were the way you were. Why you never pushed too hard. Why you always made sure people got real help. Why you seemed to carry the weight of the world." She turned to her mother's grave. "And Mom, I understand why you stayed with him. Why you forgave him. Because he spent 40 years proving that people can change, that mistakes, even terrible ones, don't have to define us forever. That redemption is real." She sat there until the sun set, until the cemetery caretaker gently reminded her they were closing. She went home to the parsonage and spent the evening reading through her father's sermons from over the years. And she saw it now, the threads of his guilt, his atonement, his hard-won wisdom woven through every message. A sermon from 1990 about the difference between faith and presumption. Faith trusts God's wisdom. Presumption assumes we know better than doctors, than science, than the accumulated knowledge of humanity. Faith works alongside reason. Presumption works against it. A sermon from 2003 about humility. True humility comes from recognizing how wrong we can be, how limited our understanding is, how much damage we can do when we're certain we're right. Humility is learned through failure, through hurting people we meant to help, through discovering that our theology can sometimes be a weapon instead of a balm. A sermon from 2015, 1 year before her mother died, about forgiveness. Forgiveness doesn't erase what was done. It doesn't pretend the hurt never happened. It acknowledges the wound while refusing to let that wound define the rest of the story. My wife taught me that. She forgave me for things I still haven't forgiven myself for. And her forgiveness didn't erase my guilt, but it gave me permission to keep living, to keep trying, to keep becoming someone better than who I was. Her father had been confessing in public for 40 years, but in language subtle enough that no one knew what he was confessing. Every sermon was an apology to Emily Cartwright, delivered to a congregation that never knew her name. Rebecca made a decision. She would tell no one. The letter would stay hidden, not behind a Bible this time, but in a safe deposit box at the bank, with instructions that it be destroyed after her death. Her father's secret would die with her, not because she thought he deserved to be protected, but because she understood that his real punishment hadn't been public shame or legal consequences. It had been 40 years of carrying Emily Cartwright with him, of seeing her face in every troubled parishioner, of living with the knowledge that his faith had failed when it was needed most. And she understood that his redemption hadn't been some dramatic moment of forgiveness. It had been 40 years of careful ministry, of making sure no one else suffered from his certainty, of learning to hold faith and reason together instead of letting one devour the other. 2 months later, Rebecca was cleaning out the last of the parsonage when she found another letter. This one was recent, written in her father's handwriting just weeks before he died, tucked into a journal he'd kept. Dear Emily, I'm 63 years old now, and I still think about you every day. I still see your face when I close my eyes. I still remember the sound of your voice when you begged me to help you, and the sound of your body hitting the pavement when my help killed you. I've spent 40 years trying to make up for what I did to you. I've helped hundreds of people, made sure they got the medical care they needed alongside spiritual care, tried to be the kind of pastor who never mistakes zealotry for devotion. But I need you to know something, even though you're not here to hear it. I was wrong about everything. I was wrong to believe I could pray away mental illness. I was wrong to think faith was enough. I was wrong to trust my theology more than your doctors. And I was wrong to carry this guilt alone. I should have been honest with my congregation, with my daughter, with everyone. Instead, I hid what I did and pretended my humility came from wisdom instead of fear. I don't know if there's an afterlife. I've preached about it for 40 years, but honestly, I'm not sure anymore. Faith is harder than I thought it would be when I was young and certain. But if there is an afterlife, and if I see you there, I'll tell you face to face what I'm writing now. I'm sorry. I'm so desperately, completely sorry for what I did to you, for valuing my beliefs more than your well-being, for killing you with my arrogance. And I hope, though I don't deserve it, that you'll forgive me. Or if not forgiveness, then at least acknowledgement. Acknowledgement that I spent my life trying to be better than the man who failed you. I'm old now. My health is failing. I won't have much longer. And I'm afraid. Not of death, but of facing you. Of seeing in your eyes what I did. Of finally being held accountable. But I'm also grateful. Because you taught me something that seminary never did. That faith untethered from compassion is just cruelty in holy language. That certainty can be more dangerous than doubt. That the most important prayer isn't for God to do what we want, but for the wisdom to know when to step aside and let professionals help. Thank you for that lesson, Emily. I'm sorry you had to die to teach it to me. Rebecca read the letter with tears streaming down her face, understanding finally the full weight her father had carried. He'd lived 40 years in that space between guilt and redemption, never quite reaching one or escaping the other, just existing in the tension, using it to fuel a ministry that saved others because it couldn't save the one person he'd failed. She thought about burning the letters, about destroying all evidence of her father's past. But instead, she did something else. She wrote her own letter, addressed it to no one, and hid it in the same Bible where her father's confession had waited for decades. I found your letters, Dad. I know what happened. I know who you were and who you became. And I want you to know you were a good man, not because you never made mistakes, but because you let your mistakes teach you. Not because you were without sin, but because you understood what sin really costs. I'm angry at you for hiding this, for making Mom carry the secret alone, for letting me grow up thinking you were perfect instead of human. But I'm also proud of you. 40 years of careful ministry, 40 years of making sure no one else died from faith misapplied, 40 years of atonement through action instead of just words. Emily Cartwright deserved better than what happened to her, but she also gave something, however unwillingly. She gave you the painful education that made you a better pastor. And through you, hundreds of people got the help they needed. That doesn't erase her death. Nothing can. But it means her death wasn't meaningless. You made sure of that. I forgive you, Dad, for not being perfect, for being human, for making a terrible mistake and spending your life trying to balance the scales. And I hope, wherever you are, if there's anything beyond death, that Emily forgave you too. Or if not forgiveness, then at least she knows you never forgot her. That she haunted you in the best way possible, the way that made you better instead of bitter. I love you. Both versions of you, the young arrogant teacher and the old humble pastor. Because you couldn't have become the second without being the first, and that's what redemption really is. Carrying your failures with you while refusing to let them stop your growth. Rebecca sealed the letter and put it back behind the Bible's backboard. Then she donated the Bible to the church library with a note. My father's Bible. He treasured it. May it serve whoever needs it next. Someone would find the letters eventually. Maybe years from now, maybe decades. And they'd have to decide what to do with them, how to hold the truth of Thomas Morgan's failure and his redemption together without letting one cancel out the other. But that was for them to figure out. Rebecca had made her peace with her father's past, with the secret that had shaped him, with the guilt that had driven him to become the man she'd known. She left the parsonage for the last time and drove through the town where she'd grown up, where her father had ministered for 40 years, where people still spoke his name with reverence and love. And she understood that we're all hiding letters behind Bibles, all carrying secrets that shape us, all trying to atone for the people we were while becoming the people we hope to be. The Bible sits on a shelf in Grace Community Church's library in a small New Hampshire town, its leather cover worn soft with age, its pages marked by decades of use, and behind its backboard, a confession waits sealed in yellowed paper. And sometimes, late at night, when the church is empty, the new pastor walks past that shelf and swears he hears it. The whisper of old sins and older forgiveness. The sound of a man talking to a ghost. The echo of faith learning humility through the most terrible teacher of all, which is the death of someone who trusted you. And he wonders whose letter will be found next, whose secrets will surface, whose carefully constructed story of who they are will shatter against the truth of who they were. Because we're all hiding something behind something sacred, all confessing to people who'll never read it, all hoping that someday, somehow, the balance sheet of our lives will show more redemption than ruin, more growth than guilt, more love than the sins love sometimes asks us to commit.